In this lecture, we begin our discussion of how economists model the choices that consumers make. So we are going to talk about some general principles. We're going to introduce the concept of utility and marginal utility, and we're going to introduce the main rule that consumers follow when they are acting rationally, and that is the bang for your buck rule. In the next lectures, we will go through and derive where this bang for your buck rule comes from, but for now we're just going to introduce it. So let's get started. Economists model consumer satisfaction with a concept called utility. So utility is a numerical measure of how happy consumers are. So consumers are going to purchase goods and services, and we can extend this concept to basically anything that consumers do. So we could model consumers as getting utility from how healthy they are, from how educated they are, from their children, from their marriage. Anything that consumers could quote unquote purchase will give consumers happiness, and again we quantify this happiness with the concept of utility. We're going to be talking about consumers purchasing what are called consumption bundles. So a consumption bundle is just a collection of the goods and services consumed by that individual. We are going to simplify things here and just talk about consumption bundles of only 2 goods, but this can be easily extended to an arbitrary number of goods, but that makes the math a little bit too complicated for us, so we will just stick with 2 goods. So consumption bundle could be if I buy 5 slices of pizza and 3 Pepsis, then my consumption bundle would be 5 slices of pizza and 3 Pepsis. So finally, a utility function is going to basically map a consumption bundle to a level of utility. So you could think about my consumption of 5 pizzas and 3 Pepsis leading to a certain level of utility. Okay, so we have 2 concepts of utility. We have total utility, which is just the amount of happiness I derive from all consumption. And we have a concept that is called marginal utility. Now we've seen that word marginal throughout the course of the semester, and we know that marginal is about the change in something. So marginal utility is going to be the change in my happiness that I get from consuming 1 more unit of one of the goods that I'm consuming. So we're going to assume that marginal utility is always going to be positive. There are some cases where it could be negative, but we don't really need to think about those in this class. So every time I consume another good, then that adds at least a little bit onto my happiness. Okay, so in general, what is my consumer going to do? Well, consumers have limited incomes. If we didn't have limited incomes, then we could purchase anything that we wanted to purchase. So we have to make choices on what we're going to purchase with our limited income. So what consumers are going to do is spend money on the things that they want to spend their money on, the goods that give them the highest increase in their utility for the dollar that they have to spend on that good. We're going to call that the bang for your buck rule. And we're going to derive a consumer optimum or a consumer equilibrium, and that's going to be a combination of the goods and services that's going to give our consumer the maximum possible amount of utility they can get given the limited income and the prices of the goods. So a little bit more formally, we could think about our consumer and consumers deciding how much to spend each dollar. And we could ask, what if our consumer is going to buy a little bit more of two goods, good X and good Y, which of those goods should our consumer purchase? And what our consumer should do here is consume a little bit more of whichever good has the higher ratio of marginal utility over price. So why should consumers do that? Well, the marginal utility you can think of as bang. So if I consume one more unit of good X or good Y, how much will that unit of X or Y increase my happiness? That's marginal utility. The buck is the price. How much do I have to pay? So whichever one of those goods gives me a higher bang for my buck, that's the one that I should consume more of. So why do we have to divide by the price? Well, again, we need to account for price differences. My marginal utility of a Porsche is probably higher than my marginal utility from a pencil. So if we did not account for the price, then we would just say, well, I should definitely purchase a Porsche because that would make me much happier than purchasing an additional pencil. But obviously Porsches are much, much more expensive, sadly, than pencils, so can't necessarily go on and do that. So that's why we have to divide by the price. So again, whichever one of these goods has this higher ratio, that's what I should focus on spending my money. So if I buy a little bit more of good X, then the marginal utility of good X is going to fall. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And eventually what I get to is this equilibrium point. So if a consumer is maximizing their utility, maximizing their happiness subject to the constraints that they face, then they're going to purchase goods such that this ratio is the same for all of the goods. So why must this be so? Well, we're going to see that if this is not so, then the consumers could increase their happiness by purchasing a little bit less of one of the goods and a little bit more of the other good. So again, what we're going to get to is in equilibrium, the bang for the buck for all the goods that consumers are purchasing must be the same.